Welcome again to a new lesson. I'm excited to dive into this session with you because this is where things start getting real. Up until now, we've looked at sustainability as a broad concept, but now we're shifting gears into how sustainability is defined, measured, and enforced in the corporate world. This module is all about understanding the rules of the game. Whether you're entering the field or looking to lead change in your organization, you'll need to know how sustainability is framed, not just ethically, but strategically, operationally, and legally. So before we explore specific frameworks, let's take a step back and ask a simple but powerful question. Why do companies need sustainability standards in the first place? Not long ago, sustainability was considered a side project, something optional, nice to have, maybe handled by a small team at HQ. Today, it's a core business priority. Why? Because the world has changed. We're facing a convergence of global challenges: climate breakdown, biodiversity loss, inequality, resource scarcity, and supply chain shocks, all happening simultaneously. In this new reality, businesses are expected to do more than generate profit. They're expected to be part of the solution. But intention isn't enough. To move from values to action, we need standards, clear, consistent, measurable ways to define and evaluate sustainability performance. Think of sustainability standards like the operating system for responsible business. Without frameworks, sustainability becomes vague, easy to greenwash, hard to govern. With them, we gain structure, language, and credibility. That's why the shift to standards and reporting is one of the most important developments in corporate sustainability today. Now that we understand why sustainability needs standards, let's look ahead. The landscape is broad and often overwhelming. We've got global principles like the UN SDGs and the UN Global Compact. Legal regulations like CSRD, SFDR, and the SEC Climate Rule. Reporting frameworks like GRI, SASB, and TCFD. Certifications and ratings from B Corp to CDP and MSCI. And even newer AI-driven tools that use data to benchmark real-world impact. Our job is to bring clarity to this complexity. You don't need to master every acronym, but you do need to understand the logic behind them. In the next slide, we'll begin with the global principles that serve as the moral and strategic foundation of all corporate sustainability work. Now that we've seen the big picture of sustainability practices, let's begin by looking at the global foundations that guide corporate sustainability. These are the high-level goals and principles. Think of them as the compass for businesses. They essentially provide direction, legitimacy, and alignment across countries and industries. These global agreements set the overarching vision. They ensure that companies don't operate in isolation, but align with internationally recognized commitments. Some of the key pillars include the UN Global Compact, with its 10 principles on human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. The OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises, which push for responsible business conduct worldwide. The International Bill of Human Rights and ILO conventions, which anchor fairness and dignity at work. And of course, like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, which set 17 goals guiding development through 2030. Together, these principles shape the rules of the game for business, influencing strategy, driving investment, and defining what success in sustainability actually means. The UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. It's voluntary but powerful. By joining, companies publicly commit to 10 universal principles covering human rights, labor standards, environmental protection, and anti-corruption. Each year, participants publish a communication on progress report. This report tracks how the company is putting those principles into action, combining both qualitative storytelling and quantitative data. Why does this matter? Because it provides accountability, visibility, and reputational benefits. It also lets companies benchmark themselves against peers, showing stakeholders, employees, investors, and the public that they are serious about sustainability. The OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises are another cornerstone of responsible business conduct. Unlike the UN Global Compact, which is more voluntary in nature, these guidelines are formally backed by governments, over 50 countries, including OECD members and others. They cover almost every area where businesses interact with society: human rights, labor, the environment, bribery, consumer interests, science and technology, taxation, and disclosure. One important detail is that this is not a membership scheme. scheme. Companies aren't signing up with a fee or certificate. Instead, governments promote adherence, and each country has what's called a National Contact Point, or NCP. These bodies guide businesses, mediate disputes, and handle non-compliance cases through dialogue. For companies, the reporting tied to OECD guidelines typically involves policies, due diligence, and performance across these wide areas. It's widely acknowledged as the leading government-backed standard for responsible conduct, helping ensure businesses contribute positively to society while managing risks. These global human rights and labor standards form the backbone of responsible business. They establish universal expectations for equality, dignity, and safe working conditions. Key areas covered include non-discrimination and equal treatment, freedom of association and collective bargaining, elimination of forced and child labor, ensuring safe and fair working conditions. Beyond values, these conventions serve as risk management tools. Companies that fail to align face human rights abuses in supply chains and the imensicration and tunes maisho spice are vain cheern with a phrase to mean sight. Reputational, legal, and financial risks. And disclosure on these topics often happens through sustainability or human rights reports aligned with frameworks like GRI or the UN Guiding Principles Reporting Framework. Of course, principles alone aren't enough. That's where regulation steps in. While global goals provide vision, regulations make sustainability a legal requirement. In the next section, we'll look at how regulatory frameworks are shaping what companies must do, not just what they should do. It is worth noting that most companies usually only to meet the bare minimum, which is compliance to mandatory regulation. But of course, that is not enough, but a good start, nonetheless. Now let's move into the European Union, which has established some of the most influential and binding sustainability regulations in the world. Unlike voluntary guidelines, EU rules are legal requirements, meaning non-compliance can have serious consequences for companies. There are 4 pillars to know here. CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which standardizes sustainability reporting across companies. SFDR, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which forces financial institutions to be transparent about their sustainability risks and impacts. The EU Taxonomy, which defines exactly what qualifies as a sustainable activity, reducing greenwashing and creating consistency. CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, which mandates companies to assess and manage human rights and environmental risks across their supply chains. Let's zoom into the CSRD because it's particularly significant. At its heart is the concept of materiality. In business, materiality means what information is important enough to influence decisions. The CSRD introduces double materiality. This means companies must report in 2 directions. First, financial materiality. How sustainability issues like climate risks affect the company's financial performance. For example, how might extreme weather disrupt operations or increase costs? Second, impact materiality. How the company itself affects the environment, people, and society. For instance, its emissions, labor conditions, or biodiversity footprint. This dual lens forces companies to consider not only their bottom line, but also their broader footprint. It's a big step in making sustainability reporting less of a PR exercise and more of a rigorous management and accountability tool. Over time, this is expected to reshape strategy and decision-making at the board level. Of course, the EU isn't the only player. Around the world, other jurisdictions are introducing their own mandatory reporting requirements. In the US, the SEC Climate Disclosure Rule and California's climate disclosure bills now mandate reporting of climate-related risks and greenhouse gas emissions for large companies. In the UK, we see TCFD-aligned rules, the National Emissions Trading Scheme, and the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting Framework. Singapore requires ESG reporting through the SGX, and here in the GCC, countries are catching up too. Saudi Arabia's Tadawul and CMA have issued ESG guidance for listed companies, and the UAE, through ADGM and SCA, is aligning disclosure rules with TCFD and GRI. The message is clear. Whether you operate in Europe, North America, Asia, or the Middle East, the regulatory trend is moving towards mandatory, standardized sustainability disclosures. This means companies can no longer afford to treat ESG as optional. Now that we've looked at goals and regulations, let's turn to reporting frameworks. These are the systems that companies use to measure, manage, and communicate their sustainability performance. Unlike regulations, which are binding, frameworks often provide flexibility and structure. But they're increasingly becoming the backbone of compliance and investor engagement. Think of them as the toolbox companies use to meet global expectations. Some frameworks are more comprehensive, others are industry specific, and together they help translate broad principles and regulations into actionable disclosure. Let's explore the major ones. There are 6 major reporting frameworks worth highlighting. GRI, Global Reporting Initiative, the most widely used framework focused on broad impacts across people, planet, and the economy. SASB, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, industry-specific standards, helping investors understand financially material ESG issues. TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, centered on climate risks, governance, and strategy. Integrated Reporting, IR framework, looks at how sustainability links to overall value creation in the short, medium, and long term. CDP, formerly Carbon Disclosure Project, a disclosure system specifically for climate, water, and forests. Each framework serves a slightly different purpose, but together they create a common language that connects sustainability efforts with investor and stakeholder expectations. The GRI deserves special attention. It's the world's most widely adopted sustainability reporting framework, used by thousands of organizations across industries. GRI is powerful because of 3 things: global recognition, it's seen as the gold standard by investors, governments, and NGOs. Interoperability. It aligns with the EU's CSRD, the ISSB, and the UN SDGs, so disclosures under GRI can often meet multiple requirements. Materiality focus. It emphasizes reporting on issues most relevant to stakeholders and the company's real-world impacts. The areas it covers are broad, from climate change and GHG emissions to biodiversity, human rights, anti-corruption, and community impact. Importantly, GRI is also adapting. With the new biodiversity standard becoming effective in 2026, companies will have to disclose their biodiversity footprint with far more rigor. So, for many organizations, GRI is not just a framework. It's the foundation of their sustainability strategy. The Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, known as SASB, was designed to give investors clarity. Its focus is on financial materiality. In other words, what sustainability issues are likely to affect the financial performance of a company. SASB created detailed disclosure standards that cover 77 different industries, from finance to healthcare to manufacturing. This makes it highly specific and relevant. For example, a real estate company would be expected to report on energy use in buildings, while a food and beverage company would have to disclose supply chain risks related to agriculture and water. Today, SASB has been consolidated under the International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB. But its sector-based approach continues to guide ESG reporting globally. The standards align with other frameworks like GRI and IFRS S1 and S2, making them interoperable. In practice, disclosure happens through annual reports, SEC filings like 10K or 20F, and sustainability reports. Companies often use the SASB materiality map to determine which issues matter most to their industry. Topics covered range from greenhouse gas emissions and product life cycle impacts to workforce safety, supply chain risks, and governance. So, if GRI tells us about broad impacts, SASB zooms in on what matters most for investors in a particular sector. Now let's look at the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This was established by the Financial Stability Board to improve how companies disclose climate risks and opportunities. Unlike other frameworks, TCFD is structured around 4 key pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. This structure helps companies present a consistent and comparable view of their exposure to climate risk. TCFD is increasingly becoming mandatory in many jurisdictions. The UK, Japan, and the US have adopted or embedded TCFD principles into regulation. From 2024 onwards, several countries require companies to report climate-related risks aligned with this framework. The disclosures cover areas such as board oversight of climate issues, climate risk and scenario analysis, greenhouse gas emissions, transition risks, and metrics for progress. The aim is to give investors a clear understanding of how resilient a company is under different climate scenarios. In short, TCFD turns climate change into a board-level business issue, not just an environmental one. The Integrated Reporting Framework, developed by the International Integrated Reporting Council, takes a holistic approach. It connects financial and non-financial information in one cohesive report. The focus here is on value creation, explaining how companies create, or erode value over time. Integrated reporting links ESG issues with strategy, performance, governance, and the external environment. It brings together financial capital with other capitals like social, human, and natural. This framework is highly interoperable and works alongside GRI, SASB, and ISSB standards. What makes it unique is the narrative. Instead of separate reports, the IR framework combines sustainability and financial information into a single story of how the business creates value in the short, medium, and long term. It asks companies to disclose their business model, governance processes, risks and opportunities, strategy, performance outcomes, and their future outlook. Think of this as the bridge. It ties sustainability directly to the financial health and long-term strategy of the company. CDP is the common language for environmental data. It runs a global platform where companies and cities report their climate, water, and forests information through detailed annual questionnaires. That data is standardized and comparable, which is why investors and large buyers use it to benchmark performance and steer capital and procurement. Here's how it works in practice. Your team completes the CDP questionnaires. CDP scores your responses from A to D-. An A shows leadership and strong evidence. Lower scores signal gaps or incomplete disclosure. Many customers also invite suppliers into the CDP supply chain program, so strong scores can help you win and keep contracts. What gets disclosed? Greenhouse gas emissions across scopes for us across 1, 2, and 3, energy use and renewable energy, water withdrawal, consumption, and discharge, deforestation risks in your supply chain, climate governance, risk management, and targets. Why it matters. The platform is backed by hundreds of investors representing trillions in assets. Performing well improves credibility, reduces due diligence friction, and gives you a clear roadmap to improve year over year. Beyond reporting frameworks, there are also certification and management standards that organizations adopt to demonstrate credibility. These standards come in two main categories. First, we have sector-agnostic standards like ISO 14001 for environmental management systems, ISO 5001 for energy management, and ISO 14064 or ISO 14068 for carbon accounting and neutrality. These are globally recognized benchmarks that can be applied across industries. Then we have sector-specific standards, like LEED and BREEAM for green buildings, and WELL or SKA for workplace well-being and fit-outs. What's important to note is that certifications not only enhance external trust, but also provide companies with structured systems for continuous improvement. They serve as proof points that organizations aren't just reporting, they're implementing tangible, auditable measures. Now let's shift to ESG ratings. ESG ratings providers such as MSCI, ISS ESG, Sustainalytics, and Moody's ESG Solutions evaluate how well companies perform across environmental, social, and governance factors. These ratings influence investor decisions, shape access to capital, and even impact corporate reputation. The process usually involves questionnaires, public disclosures, and third-party data analysis. Companies are then assigned a score, grade, or medal, like EcoVadis Bronze, Silver Gold, or Platinum. From an investor perspective, ESG ratings help with risk analysis and benchmarking. From a corporate perspective, they are critical for supplier due diligence and meeting procurement requirements. In short, ESG ratings translate sustainability actions into reputational and financial consequences. Finally, let's talk about ESG indices. An ESG index is essentially a financial benchmark. It groups together companies with strong ESG performance into investable products like ETFs or mutual funds. For example, the MSCI ESG Leaders ETF or the S&P 500 ESG Index. These indices apply inclusion and exclusion rules, often relying on ESG ratings data to decide which companies qualify. For instance, a company with repeated controversies or poor governance may be excluded. On the other hand, companies with strong climate policies and social safeguards may be included. For asset managers, pension funds, and institutional investors, ESG indices are critical tools to align portfolios with sustainability mandates while still seeking financial returns. And they represent a powerful way to mainstream sustainability in global capital markets. Think of them as bridges, turning sustainability performance into financial products investors can directly engage with. Up until now, we've looked at the core reporting frameworks, things like GRI, SASB, TCFD, and the IR framework. These are designed to structure and standardize how companies disclose sustainability data, particularly for investors, regulators, and stakeholders. Now we're moving into a different category, alternative impact frameworks. These don't usually compete with GRI or TCFD. They serve a different purpose. They are less about mandatory disclosure and more about embedding purpose, measuring impact in new ways, or leveraging data-driven innovation. Think of it this way. Reporting frameworks answer the question, what do we disclose? While these alternative frameworks ask, how do we align purpose? How do we quantify impact? How do we innovate measurement? First, let's look at mission-driven impact frameworks. These frameworks are not primarily about regulatory compliance. Instead, they're about aligning governance, culture, and strategy with stakeholder interests, employees, customers, communities, and the environment. They shift companies from a profit-only mindset to one that balances profit with purpose. That's fundamentally different from SASB or ISSB, which focus on financially material ESG issues. Mission-driven frameworks act as trust marks, signaling authenticity and long-term commitment. They're a cultural and governance tool, rather than a disclosure checklist. The most recognized example here is B Corp certification, which you've probably seen as a consumer badge, but behind that badge is a robust assessment framework. B Corp is a great case to differentiate. Unlike TCFD, which is a disclosure framework for climate risks, B Corp is a certification. Companies go through an independent assessment covering governance, workers, community, and the environment. B Corp's strength is that it embeds legal accountability to all stakeholders, not just shareholders. It's not about reporting to regulators, it's about redefining the role of business in society. Investors use B Lab's ratings for comparability, but its public-facing badge also builds trust with consumers. So remember, frameworks like SASB and TCFD are about satisfying investor/regulatory expectations. B Corp is about signaling purpose alignment and stakeholder accountability, different purpose, different audience. Beyond B Corp, there are other mission-driven approaches. Future Fit Benchmark defines a science-based baseline, asking companies to meet 23 minimum sustainability goals. The Economy for the Common Good balance sheet emphasizes values like solidarity and co-determination, especially in Europe. Fair trade certification embeds ethical sourcing into supply chains. Social Enterprise UK certification recognizes organizations reinvesting profits for social outcomes. And Benefit Corporation legal status makes stakeholder governance legally binding in some jurisdictions. Notice the difference. None of these are about annual disclosures to regulators like CSRD. Instead, they're about embedding values and accountability into the DNA of the business. Next, let's talk about quantitative valuation of impact. This is different again. Where SASB or GRI tell you what ESG issues to disclose, quantitative frameworks ask, how do we put a dollar value on those impacts? The logic is, what gets measured in money gets managed. These frameworks translate social and environmental outcomes into financial terms. That allows companies to show, in language CFOs and investors understand, the financial return of sustainability actions. So while TCFD might require you to disclose carbon targets, A valuation framework might calculate the monetary value of avoided emissions or social benefits created. Let's take SROI as an example. Unlike TCFD or ISSB, which are disclosure frameworks, SROI is an accounting methodology. It compares the social or environmental value created against the resources invested. So if you invest $1 in a program and it creates $3 of measurable social value, that's an SROI ratio of 3-to-1. SROI is widely used in nonprofits and social enterprises, but increasingly, corporates are applying it to community investment and social impact programs. The key difference here, SROI, is not about transparency to regulators. It's about demonstrating and monetizing impact for funders, investors, and internal decision-making. SROI is one example, but others exist. The Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative integrates impacts directly into financial statements. The True Price Initiative calculates the hidden cost of products by including externalities. The Natural Capital Protocol helps companies value ecosystem services. The social cost of carbon is used by governments to price climate damage. And Kering's integrated P&L monetizes environmental costs across a fashion supply chain. Again, compare this to GRI or SASB. Those frameworks tell you to disclose emissions or water use. Quantitative frameworks go a step further. They say, let's put a price tag on it so it can be compared to traditional financial metrics. Finally, we have the most forward-looking category, AI and data-driven impact frameworks. Where traditional frameworks rely on manual, lagging data, AI-driven frameworks use real-time data, machine learning, and global databases. These tools provide scalable, comparable insights across supply chains and industries. They don't just measure compliance. They measure a company's net contribution to society, both positive and negative. For example, while SASB might ask for sector-specific disclosures, an AI-driven tool can benchmark a company's actual performance against thousands of peers in real time. The Upright Project illustrates this shift. It quantifies a company's net impact across 4 domains: society, knowledge, health, and environment. This is not disclosure in the sense of CSRD or TCFD. Instead, it's a science-based, AI-driven model that shows the real-world footprint of a company's products and services. It's designed for scalability and comparability, making it especially useful for investors who want to see the full picture, both risks and opportunities. Other tools include Exiobase, which tracks environmental and socioeconomic flows globally; TrueCost by S&P Global, which monetizes externalities; Impact Cubed, linking portfolio impact to the SDGs; South Pole valuation tools, focusing on biodiversity and climate; and new AI players like SenseFolio, scraping real-time ESG data at scale. Unlike SASB or ISSB, which set disclosure rules, these tools push the frontier of measurement and comparability. By now, you might be thinking, this is overwhelming. But here's the good news. You don't need to master every framework. Most professionals only work deeply with 1 or 2. Your role is to understand the differences in purpose. Reporting frameworks like GRI, SASB, TCFD, disclosure, and comparability. Alternative frameworks like B Corp, SROI, Upright, purpose, valuation, and innovation. With this map in mind, you can navigate the landscape logically instead of trying to memorize everything. By now, you've seen just how many frameworks, certifications, and ratings exist in the sustainability landscape. And yes, it can feel overwhelming. But here's the good news. You don't need to master every framework to succeed in this field. Most analysts or managers work deeply with 1 or 2, depending on their industry or mandate. The purpose of this training is not to have you memorize every acronym. Instead, I want to give you the ability to navigate this ecosystem logically, to understand how frameworks fit together, and how to choose the right one when you're faced with a new situation. That's why we've provided you with a cheat sheet mapping all frameworks into 4 categories plus alternatives, and even the GPT-powered tool you can use to explore them further. The goal isn't memorization. The goal is confidence in navigation, embedding sustainability at the heart of their mission. That ambition shapes your choice. Mainstream reporting frameworks like SASB or CSRD may serve the first 2, while mission-driven frameworks like B Corp or FutureFit support the latter. So before you even open a reporting template, start with these 2 questions. Is the business fundamentally sustainable, and how ambitious is its sustainability journey meant to be? Once you've assessed the type of business and clarified ambition, the next step is non-negotiable. Step 3, check mandatory requirements. Regulations always come first. If you are operating in the EU, for example, the CSRD will dictate your reporting baseline. In the financial sector, the SFDR is unavoidable. Other regions are adopting the ISSB standards, and some countries have additional national frameworks. The key point here is compliance frameworks form the foundation. You can layer ambition and voluntary disclosure on top of them, but you can't bypass the legal requirements. So, the process is clear. Start by checking the business model, then clarify the ambition level, and finally lock in compliance requirements. This sequence ensures that you choose frameworks logically, not reactively. So yes, that was a lot of information. Frameworks, regulations, investor drivers, consumer shifts, and cultural change. But here's the key takeaway. You don't need to memorize every acronym or case study. What matters is understanding the bigger picture. The world around us is changing, fast. Climate policies are tightening. Supply chains are becoming radically transparent. Consumers and employees are more conscious, and they're holding companies accountable. Sustainability is no longer a nice to have, it's a license to operate. Companies that fail to adapt won't just face reputational risk, they'll face regulatory, financial, and operational risk. Your role as sustainability professionals is to see the system, navigate it, and help organizations move from compliance to competitiveness.